We're back, so we'll see what happens. Foos, Fiws, with a delightful penguin avatar, asks about authoring effect libraries. So, are there any best practices, Maxwell, for publishing effectful libraries? Is there a naming pattern like effect dash what have you? Suggestion? Maybe those could be listed on the effect homepage. Well, there are a few related questions, but starting with that one, are there any best practices? Is there a naming pattern?
No naming pattern that we've like enforced or recommended. Effect dash is probably fine. I think that's probably like the most common thing that we've seen. But I don't think we're gonna impose any sort of naming pattern at all. I think that can just be like community driven. Are there any best practices for publishing effect libraries? I think with 4.0, we are going ESM only. So you can engineer your library around that. If your library is like a binary, like a CLI or something like that, an executable, I would suggest like bundling it into like with TS up or TS down, or similar. If it's a library, just make sure your like package JSON exports and publish configs and all of that are correct. But these are like not effect specific recommendations. They're sort of just general recommendations. So yeah, so far my answer's been very non-specific, but let me see. Should effect be a dependency or peer dependency? I do have an answer for that. It should absolutely be a peer dependency if your library is designed to be used like a library. If it's a like binary, then a dependency is fine because it's all going to get bundled up as it is. But for libraries, we recommend using effect as a peer dependency so that if somebody already has effect installed, they won't end up with multiple copies of effect in their code base. If their package manager is doing things correctly. Is it best practice for the library to wrap all effect errors or let them bubble through? For example, file system errors. This is like, again, a kind of it depends situation. I think that it can be whatever you want. If it makes sense to bubble a file system error out, then sure, go ahead. But you'll see, even in like the platform modules, sometimes we'll like have one single unified error that like we wrap everything up into, and then it has like reasons that you can discriminate on, which is kind of the way platform works. So there's like two different platform errors, and then they kind of encompass all the different things that can go wrong. So like we don't have a recommendation on errors because that's part of API design. Like if your library makes sense to have specific errors that it exposes, that's what I would do. If it doesn't, then that's also fine. But I think having like a clean set of errors that your library exposes is probably a best practice. Asking because I want to publish a LibreOffice library, heavily work in progress, but you can take a look and tell me if anything is horribly wrong if you want. Just looking at the XML parser code that was linked in the chat, I can share my screen and show that screen.
And meanwhile, as a reminder, if anyone else wants to call in with any specific questions, feel free to use that button in the Riverside studio thing.
Maybe a little too big. Yeah. Let's get rid of this. So the question was, let me go back to the question. Is this a clean way to do XML parsing? I mean, you could do it like this, wrapped up in a schema if you want. Looks like this is just delegating to this parser.parse thing. Let me see. So where is this used? Parse XML. We're transforming from a string into an unknown. We parse the string into an unknown. So this is not correct. Because here, unless input is a string, which I don't think it is, because at this point you've parsed, I don't think this is correct. I think this needs to be converted back to a string somehow. Usually, like with XML parsing, like even in Effect 4.0, we have an XML like encoder but it's one unidirectional. As in, like, we, in effect 4.0, Dylan Raid, I don't actually have my stream up. Let me pull it up really quick. Stream manager. I don't know if this raid is on me or if it's on our X thingy, but whatever. In effect 4.0, we have a unidirectional XML encoder that we really like. Julio designed really primarily for like AI use cases, which takes like some object and converts it into XML that you can embed in a prompt. So you could do the same thing here. You could have a unidirectional decode, but I think like in cases like this where unless this parser exposes something to go back to a string, if there's not like a bidirectional situation here, unless you have a way to go back to a string here, having this as a schema is maybe less useful. But if there is a way to go back to a string with whatever parser this is, then yeah, you could use this as like a way to package up your XML parsing into a schema and then make it composable with other schemas. Otherwise, excuse me, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of a cold as well. Otherwise, you could just use this in like an effect.try or something similar, and just do it that way. So, oh no, did we lose Kit? Oh no. All right, I'm in charge now, everyone. Godspeed. Kit tripped on his walking machine and destroyed. Kit tripped on his walking machine and destroyed his internet.
I don't know what happened, but I'm back.
Walked too close to the sun, indeed. Anyway, the effect cube got him. Truth, Dylan. Yeah, so that's like, I mean, that's just in a brief review of this code, that would be like my main thing is like, unless there's a way to have bidirectional input output here, having this as a schema maybe is less useful. But yeah, that's my feedback here. Good luck, Max, junior social media intern. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for signal boosting my X post, and now I'm up over 1,000 followers. It feels great as the community intern for Effect.
You're a real poster now.
As the unpaid community intern for the Effect community, it feels really good to have this kind of support.
I did have a question for you, actually. This kind of reminds me of it with these error messages. It was a question that was asked to me at some point, so I'm passing the buck along, which is occasionally you'll have a service, and that service will have some errors at its level of abstraction, but that the concrete implementations of that service might be, one might be backed by Postgres, one might be backed by, I don't know, Redis or something else. And the person was asking me basically like, how would I know, should I expose those underlying error messages at the high level service, right? Say it's like a note service. Should note service be able to fail with Redis errors or Postgres errors, even though it'll only be one or the other, or should it just fail with sort of an abstract note error? Which is an interesting thing, actually. I for some reason I haven't run into that too much in the real world. Maybe I don't. Yeah, it's a bit of a quandary. But have you run into that problem or solved that domain modeling exercise?
I mean, I don't know that there's like a unified solution to this. I hate being the guy who continuously says it depends, but it does. I think. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Like this cold is something. Let me pull up. I'm going to use 4.0 for basically all discussions moving forward because I feel like we're starting to zone in on a really good API structure for things here. But my recommendation is always to surface the most information that you can. And when I say that you can, I mean like that it's safe to surface, as in sometimes those underlying errors are not things that it's not safe to surface to the client. So maybe you keep it in the error, but like for client facing messages, you you don't. And I think Dylan actually had some X posts a while back where he was showing like some of the ways that they engineered errors when during his time at Vercel on the domains platform, which was really neat. They used tagged errors to have basically like their internal representation, and then also like a message that could be exposed to the client. But if I could share like this is pretty much going to be like my answer to this question. Screen this share. In Effect 4.0, our SQL client, I think, is a good example of this, where like there can be many implementations of the SQL client, but we have this one unified like SQL error, and like all of these different errors here. Should data.tagged error capture preserve the stack traces by default? I'll answer that in a minute. You can use this like cause property on any error, like not just an effect error, but like if you pass a cause to an error, it'll keep track of that when the error is actually like rendered when you get the stack. So like when we have like errors that you don't know the shape of that are of an unknown type, I usually do it like this, where I have a cause that's an unknown and use that for passing in the actual underlying error from the client implementation. So for example, you mentioned Postgres here. If there's like a Postgres client specific error, you could pass it through here, and like this would get rendered as part of like the stack trace. And this is a JavaScript thing, not a effect specific thing. And so yeah, I would. This is kind of what I do. I use the cause property on errors to basically expose that information.
Cool. And this would work the same if you did schema.tagged error with a schema.defect or something.
Yeah. And in those cases, it's a little bit less clear. Actually, Ethan has a website. I think what's it called? Effect pattern? No, effect. Somebody remind me the name of the website Ethan has with like effect.
I think
best
it's effect
practices.
patterns. Oh, effect by example. Yep.
Effect by example. So he has a thing in here somewhere. No, it's not effect by example. There's another website he has where
something's wrong with effect people. We make too many websites.
Is it this one? Data.tagged class. Hang on. Error. Yes. Okay. Here we go. It is effect by example. I'm sorry. If something is wrong with effect people, we buy too many domains. I blame Dylan. I'm gonna share this window because I don't want to keep switching tabs.
Yeah, that is when it all started, actually.
I blame Dylan, but you know, your mileage may vary. So I kind of like Ethan's recommendation here. So for error types, use data.tagged error. Now, I think in 4.0, we're going to probably try to recommend more people move towards like schema error, like errors with schemas, but you can still use data.tagged error for now. We're evaluating whether or not the data module is actually like useful in 4.0 or not, and like whether or not we should just be using schema for everything. But for now, it still exists, and so this recommendation applies. This has the benefit of being compatible with the global error type, which schema does as well as being able to be used in effect contexts, which can save you an effect.fail. So in 4.0, this is a little bit different because you do need effect.fail unless you're yielding an error. So data.tagged error and schema.tagged error are yieldable, I think. I can't remember. But in other contexts, you still need to wrap it with effect.fail, like you do here. But anyways, the reason I'm bringing this up is because he has a you can see here that cause properties are rendered as part of the stack trace. And he has somewhere in here, he talks about, maybe it's not here. I swear he had like a nice write-up of somewhere. He had a nice write-up of like, when to use tagged errors with schema versus data.
He also has his personal website. Maybe it's on there.
Yes, maybe. Thank you, Matt. here. Okay. So let me make this bigger again. Use data.tagged error with cause unknown for internal in-memory errors. Use schema.tagged error without schema.unknown to strictly define the possible error outputs of your APIs. Then map from your internal errors to these external errors. You're likely already doing some variant of this. So I think what Ethan's getting at here is like when you define your errors with schema, having a cause that's like represented as a schema.defect is kind of like defeating the purpose of schema in some respects, because you don't actually know if that cause is going to be fully serializable. We do our best with schema.defect to make sure that it gets serializable. I forget what the implementation actually does. But point being is like with schema, usually you want to try to map the unknown error to something that's like better represented for transmitting over the wire. Like getting the message from the error and sending that instead over the wire, if you don't know anything about the error here at all. But anyway, that's kind of like the approach I usually take. I usually will have this cause unknown property on an error, whether it's a data.tagged error or, even though I'm talking about Ethan's recommendation here, I still use schema.defect sometimes for this in some of the APIs I design. And that will make sure that the error gets propagated through, as you saw here. If we scroll down here, you'll see it in the stack trace. So anyway, that's kind of like what I would recommend when you're trying to design a interface that's very generic and could have many different client implementations. So there were a bunch of questions that came through that I want to try to answer really quick. Could you remind how new schema normalizes to open AI or open APIs JSON schema? Is it possible to try in a project without upgrading the rest of effect? I don't know the underlying implementation. That would be a question for Julio, how it actually normalizes the schema. You can take a look, though. The code's open source in the effect small repo. And regarding whether it's possible to try without upgrading the rest of effect, no, you'd have to upgrade the rest of effect. But yeah, I mean, you need the runtime to be able to do stuff. But doing it like on a toy project is actually not that hard, because there's many less packages you need to install with the new effect. So if you go to like, I don't know, any of the recent GitHub Actions workflows here and like go to the snapshot job, you can get the actual install information here. So you can install effect just by npm installing this, and then like any of the platform packages or SQL packages, you can do the same thing. And as long as the hashes match here, the library, like the different snapshots will be compatible. You just have to make sure the hashes match. So yeah, I think we're making pretty good progress. There's still like I said in the previous episodes of this, there's open questions we're trying to resolve. Like we just did a bunch of work. Originally, when we were designing Effect 4.0, like we had like a lot of modules nested in here. So you'd have to like do effect /stream/stream. And we decided that made things just like unnecessarily difficult and annoying. So we're doing like a bunch of unnesting of stuff now. I think the only thing left is maybe STM, and I'm not sure if we're going to unnest testing or not. But yeah, so all of the modules, most of them will be at the top level again, aside from like a few things. And then unstable modules, so things like CLI and HTTP and a bunch of other things, persistence, blah, 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 all exist now under this unstable directory. So you would do like effect /unstable/HTTP to import those things instead of having to install a separate library to do these different things, which is kind of nice. So yeah, and there was one more question I wanted to answer. Riverside, stop scrolling me back down. I have a question regarding when to use effect.service or creating services with a context.tag. What are your guys' personal preferences? I'll be honest with you, Jose. I'll be very honest. I have actually been leaning more into the context APIs again, mostly because I just like less magic. Effect.service does a lot of magic stuff behind the scenes. It has like the default constructor that gives you default layers and things like that. And I'm kind of a fan of less magic, more explicitness. So I don't know. I've been using effect.service less, if that makes sense. Also, context.tag is useful when, at least in 3.0, context.tag is useful for situations where you don't have like a default constructor for your service. Effect.service in its current form requires you to have a default constructor. Like you need to provide some constructor for the service as a default, and then you can have other implementations. But that default layer is required. So I don't know. Originally I was like very gung ho on effect.service, and then like the more I used it, the more I was like, I don't know, I kind of like being explicit about my layers and my constructors and the tags and everything else. So,
can I steal the screen to continue this rant?
You may continue this rant.
Okay,
I'm going to answer a few more questions while you steal the screen. One more question, which is a quick one.
This does dovetail exactly with what you were saying, though, if that's okay.
Yeah, Dylan just asked, is unstable going to be stable for 4.0? And the answer is no. There's going to be that unstable directory, and we're going to work on stabilizing unstable.
So I totally agree. When I was working on this Effect Solutions website, which I talked about, I think in the last session, or maybe a few ago, a few back, there's the services and layers thing. And I'm also working, by the way, yes, on Effect Institute. So yay, I'm just going to give some a brief ad break here. Go to effect.institute and sign up if you haven't already. And if you DM me on Discord, I'll let you in early for the demos, the lessons that are there at the moment, which is it should be fun. But when I've been working on this educational material, I'm realizing that it's really nice if there's only one way to do things. So having both effect.service and context.tag, which is like these 4 words, very confusing. In order to really understand how effect.service works, you have to understand context.tag anyway. It was just it's a bit of a tangled mess, pedagogically speaking. Not that our library should be necessarily optimized just for teachability, but I mean, if you can't teach a thing, you can't get adoption. And if something is teachable, that probably means it's also understandable and regular and nice and orthogonal. So I think using that as a signal can be pretty valuable. But further, so I decided to just ignore effect.service in the documentation on Effect Solutions because it did more. It was more flexible. I guess, and also the OCD part of my brain, like with effect.service, you get that capital default layer. Then if you ever want to add another layer, it just felt like a second-class citizen and just felt ugly and awkward. And most importantly, I really like type-driven development and sort of exploring with types before writing implementations. And because of what Maxwell said, with effect.service, you need to provide an initial implementation. It was a little awkward. Whereas I have a section here called service-driven development, which is a little sketch of walking through this little example code base for like something like luma.com, some event, meetup, whatever website. And so you can sort of just go and sketch your classes, your data types. My other sort of strict recommendation is to use Schema to model everything, like treat it like TypeScript's missing algebraic data type syntax. Like this is pretend interface and class didn't exist for data modeling and only Schema exists. And then you sort of just get this way of defining classes that also gives you serialization and all these other nice features for free. But then when you get to defining your services, you define them as tags, and they're just shapes. They're just interfaces. And that means that you can sketch the interfaces, and then you can make a higher level service that orchestrates the leaf services, And you can actually write an implementation of the high-level service and get it to type check and compile by, yielding the context tags and then using them and saying, do I like this API? And if you don't like the API, then you can tweak the interfaces of the Leaf services until you do like it. And then what you can do is you can even make test implementations of those Leaf services and write tests that sort of test the high-level logic. We used to like in-memory implementations. And you can swap those Leaf services implementations out for persistent ones that hit Postgres or Redis or what have you. So that can be a really fun way to iterate on code without bloating your file. And you can sort of do it all in one file. Agents are pretty good at that. It could be a fun way to explore. And then when you have your API nailed down, you can say, okay, Codex Claudes, go make a swarm of haikus and make 1,000 files and be plentiful. But yeah, that's that addendum to what Maxwell's saying. So yeah, I would argue that we should probably, I don't know, Michael seems really happy with effect.service, and he is the BDFL, /intern. So we'll see what we can do.
It can exist. That doesn't mean people have to use it.
Yeah. Only on Michael's fork. We'll just have a special.
We'll have a special branch that he installs.
/Michael, yes.
But Cube is the real MVP. Indeed, effect.cube is the real, or cube.kitlangton.com. Anyway, yeah, so I just want to bring the conversation I was having with Dylan in the chat out to here, but basically Dylan had asked, is unstable going to be stable in 4.0? So everything that I had up on the screen before that's in the unstable directory of the small repository, and the answer was no. Unstable exists for unstable code. If we had to stabilize everything in unstable before releasing 4.0, we're over a year away or more. That's the point of the unstable directory, is for us to have a place where we can iterate and break things a little bit more without worrying about having to be backward compatible, because some of those we don't know that those APIs are finalized yet. But I will say that I think we're getting pretty close with 4.0. I don't know how close. We don't have a timeline, but we're doing a ton of work on it now. So we'll see how we get how long it takes us to get there. Let's see. Let's circling back to the effect.service discussion. Dylan says, effect.service is dog water, Mike. I've been telling it. Mike will be telling me it'll win me over for 2 years, and yet here we are. Mike says that people in TypeScript like to infer stuff, not doing type-driven development. That's why they use effect.service. Only Scala lovers love TDD. I think that that's not true, but I'm not a Scala lover, but and I prefer the more explicit APIs. I also think, to be clear, let me share my screen again. In 4.0,
I just need to really quickly just draw attention to one thing, that if you keep cube.kitlangton.com open enough, the website eventually morphs into LinkedIn. It takes a really long time, but slowly the content of the page is absorbed by this sort of LinkedIn virus that takes over. But that's really important to just mention. But yeah, go share.
LinkedIn virus. I like it. No. Literally the last question is, can I infer? Yeah. Can you answer this part? What is currently unstable in 3.0 that's going to be stable in 4.0? I answered that already. Nothing. Everything that's stable in 3.0 is going to be stable in 4.0. Everything that's unstable in 3.0 is unstable in 4.0.
We should switch them. We should go the other way around, just for fun.
And the goal will be, after 4.0 is released, to start stabilizing the ecosystem. We've not had time or the will yet to stabilize the ecosystem, the platform packages and whatnot, because we've been building out the ecosystem in 3.0. So yeah, that's the plan, is everything that's stable in 3.0 will be stable in 4.0. Everything that's not stable in 3.0 will not be stable in 4.0. And the goal will be, after it's released, to stabilize the ecosystem. Are you allowed to give any hints about Effect Days 2026 yet? Is it assuming that it's still planned? It is still planned. Can I give any hints? No, because I have no information about it. So there you go. That's not true. I have a little bit of information, but I don't have anything that's shareable. If only somebody would know. Do you guys have any examples of effect code using the Effect AI module, but also storing messages as it's streamed? You can use the chat module to do that. You can call the chat module similarly to how you would call language model, but instead you would just use the chat APIs. And the chat APIs will store the message history for you as it's streamed in. So every time you call like stream text, that message history gets appended to the internal history maintained by the chat. And chat also has the chat module also has like a couple of other helpers that let you export the chat history as JSON or retrieve the chat history and whatnot. So I feel like there was also one other question that floated by that I missed. I wanted to show in 4.0 some of the work we've done related to the whole context API versus effect.service discussion. And I don't remember if there's any examples in here, but let me just see. Is there not like a... Are there any examples of service map.make or the make method? I know you have a PR open here, Kit, but I don't know if there's any examples of the make API.
Service.
Let's see.
Yeah, I don't know.
So the current design of service map has this little make constructor inside of it that allows you to... Maybe I can just pull up an editor and show what I'm talking about. And we're still not 100% convinced on the service map naming, mostly because AI seems to still think that context is a thing, so we might rename it back to context and tag. But let me go to... What? Oh, right. I forgot. I removed this repo the other day. Hold, please. I started using Conductor to orchestrate Claudes, just because I wanted to test it out. Everybody's been telling me to try Conductor, and so I just wanted to try it out.
Do you like it, or?
I kind of like it for tasks that I want a background. And it's nice because you can open up the workspace that you're currently working in a terminal. So you can click and it'll open a ghosty session in that workspace, which is kind of nice. But I also think having a persistent version of this repo is probably useful for demos and things like that I want to do. Let me open Riverside again. Is this too small or is this okay? Take it up one, Kit, or is it good?
Yeah, I would kick it up a couple.
Okay. Oop, that's not how you spell clear. So if we go into Scratchpad and I just make...
I've got to go grab my cat. I'll be right back. She's meowing outside the sleeping baby's door.
So service map class my service. I kind of like this service map dot service my service. And then service. So this syntax should look relatively familiar. And you can still do the whole, like, this. And it'll work. And you can omit this second argument. And this will be like the version where the implementation is inferred based on like this argument that you provide, or the implementation is dictated by the type here. But I'm fairly certain that I don't remember exactly. Don't at me if I get this wrong. But I think you can do this. Type service map dot. Do we not have a helper to extract the type? Okay, fine. Type of none. Yeah. So in 4.0, you can, instead of like having to pass in the shape of the interface, like if you want, right now, effect.service doesn't exist in 4.0 yet. It will probably. We haven't fully decided yet, but it will probably exist. So if you want to like omit the actual type here, you can do that. And you can provide like a constructor, a default constructor with this make argument, which is kind of nice. And you can like do all the normal things. You can also pass a function here if your constructor needs to take arguments. And then you can just do, static layer not effect, this dot make. And personally, I prefer the explicitness here. I know exactly what my layers are going to look like. I can create multiple of them. Layer test equals this, or layer dot succeed, for example. Oops.
Yeah, and if you want sort of the behavior we have with effect.service, it's pretty trivial just to have a base layer, just call it, I don't know, layer without dependencies, even if you wanted to, or layer naked or whatever.
Yeah, and like that's kind of, I mean, again, like this is right now in 4.0 the current status of like having something similar to effect.service present. Eventually, maybe, I think effect.service will come back. I think it will exist. But do one as a layer factory with dependencies. Sure. I don't want to type all that out, but it's possible. I'm not sure I get the difference between context.tag with static live and service map here. The difference is, but Mike, my point is that I prefer the explicit APIs. You don't have to prefer that. People don't have to prefer that. Effect.service will probably come back. But my point is that I like being very explicit. I like knowing exactly what's bundled up into my layers. I like having to pass things manually. I think, like, for me, explicitness makes it easier for me to reason about what's going on, and I don't enjoy the magic of effect.service. But that's just me. And the Benz, to answer your question, the difference between context.tag with a static live layer and service map here, the only major difference is this make constructor that you can pass now, where you can basically like give your service a default constructor if you want, and then use that in the implementations here. You could obviously omit this and pass the type instead, right? Like I did before. Void, no, effect void. And then you would delete this. But the point is that you could have that default constructor if you wanted it with this version. It's pretty similar to context.tag with a static live layer, but the difference with service map is that it supports that like make constructor being attached to the service. But yeah, so that's kind of like my my thing is like, I think after having used effect.service quite a bit, played around with like the dependencies and accessors and everything like that, I don't enjoy all the magic. I prefer to be explicit, even if it's more verbose. And I think it actually is more clear to newer engineers onboarding to a project who haven't used effect before. Looking at effect.service, I think people can get pretty easily confused about what it's actually doing. Whereas here, yeah, it's way more verbose, but like I can annotate these layers with comments and things like that to like guide engineers in the future. Like I can provide actual descriptions of like, this is the production layer that we are using, right? If I wanted to have a static layer without dependencies, I can do that as well. And like, I think from my perspective, having used effect.service quite a bit now, this is what I'll be going with in the future. Whether or not effect.service exists in 4.0, I won't be using it for my own code.
And I think now more than ever and going forward, like the marginal cost of lines of code is becoming increasingly driven down to be almost negligible, and clarity and readability and understandability is probably even more important than ever.
100%. 100%.
And regularity too, like, and once again the teaching stuff, because somebody understands this, and then they look at another file and it's written with a different whole set of constructors and patterns and implicit details, and it's just like, what? You basically have to learn the same thing.
I almost think having the additional context to your point kit, like the model actually seeing all of this as opposed to it being pre-baked under the hood, I think probably would help it figure out what's going on. Plus, you can add additional context here. Like, and if the AI is generating it, it can add additional context to these layers to like say when they should be used and what they should be used for. I don't know. And yeah, there's two other questions in the chat. Does service map replace context.tag in 4.0, or is it just an alternative? So right now, this is still under heavy debate internally. You guys can voice your opinions if you want, but it's under heavy debate. In 3.0, let's do this, 3.0 and 4.0. In 3.0, it's called context. In 4.0, it's currently called service map, because context is just a bag of services. It's a map of services. We may rename this back to context. It's still under debate. And then also tag, or maybe context.tag in 3.0 is called, Jesus, can't type, service map.service in 4.0. So yeah, that's it may go back and it may not, but right now I think that some of us have experienced models having models now are starting to like understand effect much better. And like in 3.0, it's actually quite easy to get the model to write very good effect code, because they're now being like trained on 3.0 code and it's being incorporated into their context. So models actually perform quite well in our experience with like effect. And so we don't want to make it harder for folks who are using AI to write effect code. And one thing that we've seen trip models up is this renaming here. So we may end up just renaming back to context.tag, but we haven't made the decision yet. It's like something we're still debating. Like, do we just let models catch up and name it based on clarity, or do we go back to context and context.tag since that's what people know and are learning already? We haven't decided yet. Yeah. So
maybe we should elicit some feedback possibly. If you have strong opinions, more information the better. Don't let us corrupt your thinking.
True.
If you want to share your opinions on Discord or Michael's personal email address.
Yeah, make sure you send all your feedback to Mike's personal email. But yes, we would love to hear opinions. I can't guarantee that we'll like go with the majority or anything like that, but yeah. If you change too much, it'll backfire. Yes, you're correct. If we change too much, it will backfire. That's why we're trying to keep the APIs as stable as possible, as we can. Some things we changed because they make more sense. But we're trying to keep the APIs as similar as possible. So I think one major change, I don't know if it was changed back. Yeah, is like the naming of the fork combinators. So fork was renamed to fork child. I'm still not 100% sure that this was the right thing to do, but there's fork child, there's fork detach, which is kind of like fork daemon from 3.0. So fork child is fork detach is fork daemon, the new fork daemon, and fork scope still exists. What are we building today? We're not building anything. This is effect office
What have we
hours.
done? We've wasted all your time. Yeah, it's office hours, so we generally answer questions. Though, we could build stuff in the future. But yeah, it didn't. Maybe next week or something. Well, next week is the holidays, so in a couple weeks we'll maybe build something. I'll try to bring something interesting.
But yeah, so those kinds of renamings are things that we're trying to do to make it clear what's going on. Another bunch of like things was in like the cause. Is it cause? No, not cause. Sorry. The catch APIs. So a lot of feedback that we got in 3.0 was like that effect.catchAll was really confusing because it doesn't actually catch all. It catches all known errors, but not defects. In order to catch defects, you'd have to catch all cause. So in 4.0, we renamed this to effect.catch and effect.catch cause, which I think is still the current. Yeah, catch cause filter, and catch defect. So, yeah, there's like very specific renamings we've done. But most of the APIs should still be the same. Should still feel very similar. And I agree with Mike here, Dylan. Fork background versus fork detach doesn't really convey the actual meaning of what's going on, because every time you fork an effect program, they're all in the background. The semantics are just different about which fork combinator you use. So like effect.forkChild forks into the background, but the child is still tied to its parent in that you still have the parent-child relationship. Fork detach detaches the child from the parent and attaches it to the parent, the global fiber scope. Like, so it becomes like a new same level as all the global fibers. And then fork scoped, still all of these are forking things into the background, but fork scoped, instead of having a parent-child relationship, forks the fiber into a scope, and now the lifetime of that fiber is controlled by the scope. So that's kind of fork root could be one. Yeah, I don't know. Like these renamings are things we're trying to do for clarity. So again, if people have super strong opinions, you can let us know or provide suggestions of things.
One thing that could be interesting to help, because when experimenting with effect small, obviously LLMs are trained on the version 3 and therefore do catch all, and then we'll be like, catch all doesn't exist. You know what? Let me try to just delete effect, or just I'm going to use promises, or I'm going to just try something totally different. Maybe we have to ask Mattia, but perhaps there's a way to have the LSP help in those cases and sort of wrap those kinds of errors. If it's a method not found, it can sort of also give basically a clue as to what to do next. That would be very useful.
Almost like having the LSP provide suggestions, like, oh, you used catch all, maybe you meant catch. It was renamed.
Yeah, like this was effect 3, and now it's this one. That would probably be pretty useful, especially if we don't, like, I do like the idea of giving it new names, like don't just change the semantics of fork, but make everything explicit, and then you won't have the problem of, you'll have something missing that it can be redirected to. Could be interesting.
I also was thinking, like, when we eventually get to releasing 4.0, when it's like ready for beta, because like to be clear, the current release process that we're thinking about, if I open up our little to-dos here, the current release process that Tim and I have discussed, I don't remember if I've discussed it with Mike, so this is still, I guess, don't quote me on this, but we're currently in alpha and working on like to-do items. When we've addressed all the to-dos we've listed and also addressed anything that like we're talking about internally, we would move on to like beta releases, which are basically pre-releases to NPM from this repository, the small repo. And then while we're in beta, we would be working on like JS docs and code mods and things like that, basically letting people kick the tires, finding like any issues, telling us like what works, what doesn't, and like integrating those changes as we also work towards like improving the AI performance on 4.0 and providing more tooling for migrations and et cetera, et cetera. And then once we're happy with like the betas, we'd move on to like release candidates, which are still published from the small repo. And once we've like reached the point that we're ready for like mainstream stable 4.0 release, we'd copy the code over to the main repository and start publishing from there. So that's like at least what Tim and I had discussed. It may change, but the goal is to provide as much tooling as we can, both for AI to like help with migrating code from 3.0 to 4.0, as well as like tooling that's not AI related. So things like code mods, documentation, JS docs, which will help like AI with context. Maybe Mattia can do something with the LSP. Yeah. So that's kind of like what we've been thinking.
I think there was a question in the Discord. Let me see.
Was there? Sorry,
there were a couple. Well, we only have a couple minutes. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to go too far over an hour, but my brain starts to hurt after a while.
I'm good to go a little longer if you are, but we can also like try to keep this tight to an hour if you want.
Okay, let's just do. There are a couple more in the queue, so let's take those. Also, sign up for Effect.Institute. Go to Effect.Institute and DM me in the Discord, and I'll let you in early. There's needs to be. I'm working on a lot more content, but right now there's like an intro course. It's more of a high level sort of. I'm making fun of Promise again and contrasting its failures with Effect to sort of contextualize for people who don't even know like why was Effect useful. So I'm trying. It's like a scared straight sort of. Seminar to frighten you and show you the hell you're living in. Put on the They Live glasses, right? That's the film, and see the hellish aliens you walk amongst, and then are frightened into saying, like, "Oh yeah, we gotta get rid of these aliens and replace them with beautiful Effect people."
So there was a question in the Discord about error handling in the GraphQL client in this person's app. I don't think I can I don't know how to can I open this in like a browser? Open link? I can. Let me see if I can just switch my screen over to a browser window. Screen, window, this one, sure. This is still really small. There you go. This was the screenshot I was provided with. I think this looks fine except for a few things. One thing I would do is there's no need to annotate types here. So at the as effect.effect, blah, 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 none of that's necessary. You should you can annotate the return type of your function here, and that'll help with like TypeScript's performance over time, like as your code base grows. So if you want to annotate types here, that's fine. Just know that like if you add more errors or if you change the return type, you'll have to update the signature. But that's easy if you're using the Effect LSP or language service plugin, because you can toggle types as a code action. But anyways, you don't need the annotation here. This should be automatically inferred. And actually right now, I think you have too many errors listed here because right now this particular method only returns either a GraphQL error or a schema decode error, but not this null data error. So if you were to let this method infer instead of annotating the return type, you would see this signature without the null data error in there. So maybe you choose to let this infer if you want, but yeah, that would be my only recommendation is like, don't, at least if within the generator, there's no need to manually annotate types like this. Some other questions. I'd love to hear a little bit about best practices for testing an effect when looking through the repo. I noticed you're mostly using effect vtest with test clock. I've actually been using it with durable objects. I've also tried using effect.flip to test for expected errors. Do you have any best practices outside of the vtest package? Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like any particular best practices, so to speak, but I think some useful patterns that have emerged over time are if you want something to be testable, easily testable, abstract it into a service, because you can inject test implementations, which make it much easier to, like, actually test the behavior of your code. Regarding the vtest package, you can use it if you want, you don't have to, but it provides nice ways to like run effects within vtest. There's also some helpers that will that will let you like share a layer between different tests if you want to do that. Like if you don't want the layer to reconstruct every time. But I think like one of the things that I see people, it's not a mistake, but like one of the things that I think could be helpful to people in Discord is kind of what this individual mentioned. Effect.flip is a combinator that swaps the success and error channels. So if you're testing an effect that you know should fail, like the expected behavior of that effect is to fail, you can use effect.flip and then assert directly on the error. Like you don't have to like catch it and then bind it to a variable and then assert on that. You could use effect.flip, return the error instead of the success value, and then if that effect succeeds, it would be a failure in the test because you're asserting on the failure case. And you can also use effect.exit as well if you want to assert on like the full exit of the program. There was one more question in here. What's a good way to think about effect.atom or effect.atom? My view is atom is a canonical representation that doesn't compute anything or change state. All inputs that mutate state. Okay. I wish I had that quote of like, I didn't read any of this, but good for you, or I'm sorry that happened. My viewpoint, so effect.atom is a reactive state management library. It's not tied to a particular framework. It can be used in React. There's a React package. It can be used in Vue. There's a Vue package. But that's really what it is at its core. And it provides useful ways for working with effect on the front end in a performant manner. So like, helping you to build atoms out of effect runtimes and things like that. It also integrates really nicely with effects HTTP and RPC packages to get like a React query-esque behavior. So you can have like reactivity keys and things like that. It has optimistic update support and things like that. So that's basically what effect.atom is. It's a reactive state management library, but it also has a bunch of other nice things that make working with effect, particularly on the front end, much easier. And then there were a few other questions in chat. Maybe we can hit these ones and then we can decide if we're done. I find myself reaching for effect for creating workflows for agents. Have you tried Vercel's use workflow directive? I think Mike has tried use like the Vercel workflow stuff. Maybe he can provide some comments on that, but I haven't tried it yet, so I can't really say anything in an educated manner about that. Any other questions in the Discord? Office hours. Could I ask you to take a look at this question? There's a question about this seems counterintuitive, but does HTTP API client not work with HTTP client.retry transient? This doesn't. If there's a bug, it works if. I'm gonna have to read this offline, East Balls, because there's too much here. Any other questions before Kit and I wrap up office hours? 4.0 questions, other questions, things that you folks want to know. Oh, Mike responded. He said, regarding the Vercel workflow thing, he did try it, doesn't think it's a good API for complex workflows. Good to have people note the durability problem. There you go. Use effect workflow. Any other questions, folks? Otherwise, I think we're probably going to wrap up.
Cool. And yeah, in a couple of weeks when we do this again, if anyone wants to pre-prepare any questions or code bases, feel free to call in too. That's pretty fun. Otherwise, I'll also try to have some, code example or little project we can maybe walk through.
What, Kit? We're not going to do this on Christmas Eve?
Yeah, okay, let's do it on Christmas Eve.
I'm kidding with you.
Let's do 24-hour Christmas 24 spectacular. Effect on ice.
Yeah, effect Christmas edition. Merry Christmas, everyone. Effect small. Here you go. I'm just kidding. I can't commit to that at all. Gifting effect pills. Could you showcase effect workflow at some point? I think that is perfectly reasonable, and we can definitely do that. I'm actually working on a little toy effect cluster myself, just to become more familiar with the API, and also because I'm working on a few things related to cluster. So maybe we can try to pull some of that code in to one of the future effect office hours and start talking a little bit more about cluster and workflow and how all of those things work. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, Kit.
Yeah. No. See you in a couple of weeks, and take care, everybody. Thanks for stopping.
Cheers, everyone. Happy holidays.